Hey, do-badders, welcome to Bad Boy Running. Our next guest is someone who was recommended to us by Robbie Britton. During the course of the conversation with him, he was talking about Shona's work to do with sleep and how she's actually at the forefront of understanding how sleep affects performance and what we can do to try and benefit the power of sleep, and also how to avoid just conking when you're not getting it. So we then emailed Shona. She's been kind enough to come on. So welcome on the podcast, Shona Halson.
Hey!
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for getting us early for me. So appreciate it.
So for do-badders, if you're Shona has basically interviewing with two old men who look like they've not slept in weeks. So it's very appropriate for the topic, really.
Yeah, it's a kind of a test, isn't it, to kind of prove why we need sleep.
Yeah, it's funny. People try to tell me that they've had sleep and that they're doing fine. I'm like, I can look at you and I can tell that you're sleep deprived, but you guys don't look too bad, so you not too much to worry about.
How did you get into sleep?
Yeah, it's a funny one. So my PhD back in the day which I actually did in Birmingham, in Brumland, and that was really looking at fatigue. So I was really interested in this idea. I was looking at fatigue and overtraining, and then when I finished that, I got a job at the Institute of Sport in Canberra here in Australia, and the role there was really around fatigue and recovery. But we kind of worked out that we don't really know anything about fatigue, and it's very complicated and it's a bit of a hot mess. So really started looking into the recovery space. And then of course, what's the best, tool that we have to recover is obviously sleep. And just found that working with some of our elite athletes, they just didn't really know what good sleep was, asking questions around, I wake up 4 or 5 times at night to go to the bathroom, is that normal? And so we just kind of went down this path of trying to understand athlete sleep, because when we went to the science, to the literature, there really wasn't anything to really talk about how the really top level athletes sleep. And we always just thought they'd sleep good. They train a lot, they must be tired, they must sleep good. But after we started talking to them and started really, delving deep into the world of sleep, we sort of realized, wow, there's a few issues here. And that was sort of how we sort of got interested in understanding sleep in athletes.
Is that because, were most athletes not sleeping well because of things like stress and mental strain, or were they not sleeping because of a physical burn from the exercise?
Yeah, it seems to be lots of different reasons, and I think some of the reasons depend on the sport that the athlete's doing. So athletes who have to get up early in the morning, and in Australia we like to do that very well. We like to get some of our athletes up in the middle of the night practically to train. So having athletes wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to train is not unusual, and that just limits their ability to actually get sleep. Like the time that you would need to go to bed to get the sleep that you need if you have to wake up early is a real challenge. So early starts are not great. Competition times, so different sports might play at night, and obviously there's troubles falling asleep after matches, especially if you're a professional football player playing in front of lots of people. But then you also just have the realities of being an athlete. And of course it can be stress, and that can be, like for everyone, general public as well. But for elite athletes, there might be stress around selections, around sponsorship, just having busy days, all those kinds of things, plus all the other stresses that normal people face. There's, we find caffeine can be an issue with a lot of athletes. You want to have that little hit before your afternoon training session, and that can have longer term effects. And then I think obviously things like social media, video games, gaming. Athletes are often competitive, so they like to game and they like to win, and so that can get pretty intense. So I think there's kinds of lots of things, some things around behaviours, some things around things that we do, like early morning training sessions, travel at crazy times of the day. So, but generally there's lots of, being an athlete's kind of like the perfect storm for things to go wrong when it comes to sleep.
Do you think athletes have had worse sleep than the general public traditionally?
Yeah, so some of the literature suggests that, actually shows when you compare to like normal people, inverted commas, like us, like me, that athletes actually sleep a little bit poorer. So slightly shorter durations and slightly shorter quality, which we didn't actually expect to see. You'd think, tired athletes,
Yeah.
surely they'd just hop into bed and crash. But yes, if they're sore, if they're injured, if they're stressed, all these things that can kind of contribute.
And is this a
That's
relatively recent phenomenon? I mean, how far back have things like sleep been tracked in athletes, or is it is this something that you would correlate with like we say with social media with additional distractions, or has this always been an issue?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We probably started doing some of the first, really practical kind of monitoring in athletes, and that was, I guess, maybe 12, 13 years ago. So that was the first that we sort of started to understand sleep. I think that the social media, phone use, smartphone use, that's made things worse. As a general rule, I would suggest, but we don't really have data that goes beyond, sort of 10 years ago. So it's a little bit harder to tell. But when you think of, all the additional, really top level athletes, all the additional things that they have in their life around the social media, around, TV coverage and all those kinds of things and sponsorship, it's gone to a whole other level. So it wouldn't surprise me if the demands that are placed on athletes today are a lot greater, and therefore have a bigger detrimental effect on sleep. And I think the other thing that I and a lot of other people sort of forget is, success and failure is so public in athletes. And so, we all just think, oh yeah, what a cruisy, easy life these athletes have got. They don't work, they just train. And it's like, yeah, well, hang on, not many people have a job where, if you lose, you do that in front of the world, and people can watch it on replay. And, so I think the more public that sport becomes and the more interaction we have and the easier it is to access, then I certainly can see the stress of being an athlete would be increased.
And was there any particular reason why you started to track sleep at that time? Was it a case of there is a general awareness around looking at sort of multiple factors in how athletes perform, or was there a piece of research or something else that kind of that linked and made this more relevant as something that needed to be tracked? What was the kind of the triggers or the environment under which this started to be monitored?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it was a bit of one of those twists of fate. When I was working at the Institute of Sport, the head of physiology at the time, a guy called Professor Chris Gore, he'd gone to a university in Adelaide, and he went back for like a reunion. And he met up with this guy who was also in his class from 20 years ago, a guy called Professor Drew Dawson, who's like the doyen of sleep in Australia. Like he's just the guru. And they just started chatting. And then that's kind of actually how it happened. We knew it was important. We had no sleep expertise. We had no technology to monitor it. So we linked with this university because, people like sport. So they're like, oh, cool, we can connect with you guys. And that was really the start of it. We kind of knew it was important, but we didn't really know where to go to start because there weren't the wearables out there that there are now. There was like sleep monitoring devices, like research grade accelerometers that were, and we still use some of them today, but we didn't have easy access to devices. We didn't know what to do with the data when we got it. So it was really one of those things that if those two hadn't have connected, I don't know where we would have been from a sleep perspective, but we knew it was important. We were hearing athletes talk about it. It was just one of those things that brought the two groups together.
Is it something that just when it comes to these kind of things, it's something that coaches and people who are responsible for athlete performance, they kind of just stumble on, like through conversations, rather than going, oh, we've got this specific problem, let's go out and seek to solve it. Is that kind of as to when they focus on various things, it just happens to be who is in front of them or who they have connections with at the time? How what is the kind of the thinking behind the way in which they seek out help with performance?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it's when the wheels fall off. So if an athlete is not performing training as they should, can't quite work out what might be going on. Maybe they're getting injured a lot or sick a lot, and so then they might start to dig in a little bit and find out what's going on. And I think one of the interesting things about sleep is that unless you're measuring it, you have no idea what an athlete's doing. So, when, we can measure skin folds to see if, people's body composition changes. You eat with people, coaches will eat with their athletes. They monitor them when they're training. They see them when they're training. But the sleep's the sort of this thing that no one really could get a good hold of in terms of what were the athletes doing. And, sometimes it was like, we'd see an athlete tweet at like 3:00 in the morning and we're like, well, that's probably a bit of a sign that you're actually awake. But we didn't really know. And so, and then as sort of sleep got popular in other areas, so like in well-being and in general health, we know how it's linked to cardiovascular health and diabetes and metabolism and all this stuff. So sleep kind of got interesting to everyone else. And then the coaches kind of started to read about things and understand that, okay, sleep might be important. So it just kind of gets flagged that way. But then often it'll be an athlete will say, I'm really stressed, or, death in the family, relationship breakdown, something like that. They stop sleeping, the wheels fall off, and then they go, we might need some help in this area.
And when that happens, what do you then take the athlete through to try and help them?
Yeah, so from a sleep perspective, there's a couple of ways that we can do it. So if you've got, or they've got a wearable, or we can give them some sort of activity monitor, like research grade device, probably put them on, get the athlete to wear them for maybe 7 to 14 days. Always like to get a weekend in there because that's where stuff kind of goes wrong. Maybe fill out a sleep diary with it, and then we get the information, and then I would sit down with the athlete and say, okay, this is what you're doing good. This is what sort of things that you can improve. If we don't have access to those kinds of things, it might just be simple screening questionnaires, conversations, but it really is. And that's one of the things challenges I have with wearables, is that most of them don't actually tell you what to do. You need to sit down with someone to work it out. So they can be good from an education perspective, but it's where you get to talk to someone. That's where the interesting stuff happens. That's where they say, I get home after training, and because I live in a shared house, I go straight into my bedroom and I spend time reading or working on my computer or whatever. Everything's in the bedroom. And then, you can see, okay, well, that's where some of these issues might be arising from. But unless you sit down and talk to them, you don't know where they are. You don't know, you see that they're not asleep, but you don't know what they're doing, or you see that they're sleeping and you don't know where they are. So I think it's the conversation that you have with them that's where the interesting stuff comes out.
Because with runners, I've always been told like that they'll typically sleep during the day. So you might go out and you have a run in the morning, they then have a lunch sleep, an afternoon sleep, and then a secondary run after that. Is that quite unique in sport?
I wouldn't say so. I think napping is pretty common, and it's particularly common for athletes who do the 2 sessions a day. It's common for athletes who have big volumes of training. It's common for athletes who might have an early start. So if you're a runner and you want to get out early before it gets too warm, or you want to do lots of Ks, so you've got to start early in the morning, that can also have an effect. And if you want to just feel good for the second session, sometimes a quick nap is a really good way of doing that. So I often say, athletes are always asking about how they can hack their day and hack their sleep and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, look, the only way to get over being sleep deprived is to sleep. Like, it's the only thing. You can trick your body with caffeine for a short period of time, but you've got to sleep. And if you're sleep deprived, a nap is essentially the best way to get over it, apart from another full night's sleep.
And so, do you want to talk us through the basics then of, because we hear about kind of deep sleep and REM and all those things. What if you were to categorize the different types of sleep and actually give us an overview of what we should be expecting, or what we should what would be the perfect amount for us as athletes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I had a really good answer. The first thing that's a challenge
I think
is
the other things of paying attention there is the way that David says "as athletes," because everyone thinks they're an athlete now.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that makes well the fact that people are training in different ways as well, whether that's having an impact.
Yeah, look, I think so. I think everyone's people are, exercise is popular. People are, getting out there and, training more and more and doing more and more exercise. So I think, that does become, and we can monitor, I'm currently trialing 3 different wearables, right? So I feel like the loser that's, out at the gym with all these different devices on. But,
what are the different ones out of interest?
yeah, I'm using Aura Ring.
I noticed that, yeah.
Yeah. I was doing a presentation the other day, and one of the questions in the chat was, "Are you wearing an Aura Ring?" I'm like, "Yes." Trialing, obviously, using the Apple Watch. We're potentially using that for other things other than sleep, and a new device called a BioStrap that we're potentially going to do some validation work on as well. So, yeah,
Is the Aura Ring just a ring that will monitor?
Yeah, I've got to be careful how I do this. Last time I was sort of, doing the middle finger.
It's quite chunky.
Yeah, look, it's I am, as a scientist, the world's biggest skeptic. But I do find the ring really gives you some really interesting information. I find it highly accurate. I guess some people don't like wearing rings for people in the gym, gripping, there may be, I have no affiliation with any of these, so I sort of feel like I can talk a little bit about them. But I do like the Oura Ring. I like it a lot more than I thought I would. And the new version's going to have a lot more temperature sensors in it. And that's what we're interested in from a female athlete perspective, and sleep across the menstrual cycle and kind of understanding those things. So the Oura Ring for us is just, I guess, practical and easy to use. So.
And do you have to recharge it, or does it somehow magically do a movement okay?
No, yeah, you recharge it probably about every 5 to 7 days, which is surprisingly good in comparison to a lot of other devices. So, and there is some validation work that's been done on it. So I feel it's probably the sort of thing that a lot of these wearables now, if you were doing research, you would never be able to publish them because people were like, "Oh, we don't know what's in those and we don't know what the algorithms are." But now it's sort of getting to the point where we know more and more about these devices, and you can kind of put them on elite athlete. They like them. We can publish the data, so it becomes a nice, happy medium.
Interesting. So, yeah, going back then to what would you say? What are the different stages of sleep, and are the perceptions true, and what would be the so it's because we keep on interrupting you, but that's what we do best, really. But
oh, good. So one of the big challenges is that everybody's sleep need is different. We are now starting to see the genetic, that there's a strong genetic component to sleep. So sometimes I'll be talking to an athlete and they'll say, only get 6 hours, and it'll be like their mum or dad does the same thing, or, you can often see that there's a hereditary component to it. So it becomes hard because some people might be have a really high quality sleep, so their depth of sleep is great, and so they might need a shorter duration. And there might be others who their quality is not great, they toss and turn a fair bit, they're light sleepers, so they may need a greater duration. And so it's really hard to give some of these generic sort of guidelines for athletes because everyone's so different. But I do get people to think about a couple of things. I kind of get them to think about how they feel when they wake up in the morning. So most people, a lot of people don't jump out of bed feeling fantastic, but if you still feel pretty bad after an hour and, you've had a coffee or two, maybe you haven't had a great night's sleep, like you should really feel pretty good after an hour. If you can't get through the day, like it comes to 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you just, you're in the passenger seat of a car and you fall asleep, or, athletes fall asleep on massage tables or in buses and stuff like that. And that might be a sign that you haven't had enough. So I think it's always good to try to look back and see what the response is to your sleep. And if you can get through the day, you feel pretty good, you probably slept all right. And I think most people know what it's like to have really short sleep and then try to get through the day. It's not fun. So I get people to try and think of what's normal for them and when they feel good. Like a lot of people, I'm 7 hours. I know that if I get less than 7, I don't feel amazing. But other people it's 10, other people it's 6. I get people to just think about what's normal and what makes them feel good from a sleep perspective.
And should we, because you hear about in Japan in particular, but sleep booths and the idea that afternoon naps are beneficial for productivity. Like, is that something if we could, we should be slipping in our day?
Yeah, I would say yes on the whole, because the majority of people are sleep deprived. But the time when napping is not good is actually if you're not sleep deprived. So some people sleep because they're bored, or they're on holidays, they've got nothing else to do, or they just feels good, it feels nice to have a little nap. And if you don't actually need that, and maybe you nap too late in the day or for too long, it can really mess up your nighttime sleep. I'm sure most people have experienced that. Before you get home from work, you fall asleep on the couch, and then you go, wow, it's midnight, and I just can't sleep. So that's when
Yeah.
nap's bad, because we know consistency of sleep is really important. So usual bedtimes, usual wake times. So I would work with some swimmers who would obviously get up ridiculously early. They'd do a swim session, a gym session, and they'd be home by maybe 11 in the morning, and they'd have a nap at like 11. But that was perfect, because then they had a really long amount of time before they went to bed at night to build up some more of that, what we call sleep pressure. So they get sleepy. Whereas if you get home from a training session at 5 in the afternoon and you have a nap, and you wake up at 6, it's like, and you want to go to bed at 10, you've only got like 4 hours of the day to get sleepy, and you probably won't be. So depending on how sleep deprived you are. So I would say on the whole, naps are good, because most of us are sleep deprived. Most of us can be more efficient, more productive, train better in the afternoon, feel better, whatever it might be. It's just being a bit careful. If you don't actually need it, you can actually mess yourself up more.
And is it true that, because this idea that if you are sort of sleep deprived, say during the week, you can't actually catch up on it at the weekend? Like, how does that work? And does does
Yeah.
it obviously doesn't work cumulatively? It works on a day by day basis. Just if you could explain that, just so that it makes sense as to why that doesn't work, if it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit controversial, this idea of this, social jet lag, where, we're sleep deprived during the week and then we mess up our habits on the weekend. What we do know is the more consistent you can be with bed and wake times across your 7 nights of the week, the better. So go to bed at one time, wake up at the another time, and keep that as often as possible exactly the same. That's how we know you get good sleep. And there's even one study that says if you're a short sleeper, you only get less hours than you need, as long as you are consistent, it's probably not that bad. And so this idea of being consistent becomes really important. And so if you're getting a certain amount of sleep during the week, and then on the weekend it's completely different, you really throw out that consistency. And it's not like being jet lagged or a shift worker, but if you're really different, it kind of can be, which is a bit of a mess for your consistency. So consistency seems to be the thing to prioritize and to focus on. But if you are really sleep deprived during the week, as I said, the only way to catch up is to sleep. So for some people, they will actually need more sleep on the weekend to feel good and prep them for during the week. But my approach would be to try to find ways of getting more sleep during the week, rather than having, feast and famine, where you've got no sleep during the week and then massive amounts on the weekend, because the body likes to know, it likes routine. The best thing that you can do is eat, sleep, and train at consistent times. The body just
This is
loves
not rave
routine.
repeat.
Sorry? Yeah, yes. No, yes. No,
Okay,
similar
right. I've
concept,
been
sort
sort of completely wrong.
of. No.
Is there the other thing that was associated with that has been mentioned before, is the fact that by having a lack of sleep over long periods of time and then trying to catch up with it, that actually can it create long term? I mean, can generally this create long term damage or long term issues if you are regularly going without the sort of the requisite amount of sleep? Or will your body just naturally get to a point where it will kind of shut down and get the sleep it needs? Like, can your body, or eventually will it do something to force itself to recover?
It does happen to a lot of people, because it is very unhealthy from a psychological and physiological perspective to have long-term short sleep. We know now, linked to heart disease, diabetes. There's lots of different things, metabolism, mental health, mood, lots of different negative effects of consistent short sleep. Now, some people sort of feel like they can do that. And I mean, my example, and I don't know whether 5 or 6 weeks you'd consider that long term, but the few times that I've worked at an Olympics and been in the village, and we usually work 5 to 6 weeks, it's usually no days off, it's usually not much sleep. You can kind of do it. You know there's an end in sight. You feel ordinary, but you get through it. And then comes the crash when you get home. When you get home, it's like, oh my God, I could sleep for a month. But because you know there's an end in sight, you can kind of do it. I think often what happens to some people is that if they go through just less sleep than they need for a fairly long period of time, they might have some negative health effects, and then potentially comes the crash. Your ability to be resilient, to cope with life, as I said, mental health and sleep are so closely linked. So there usually comes a point where body and brain had enough. And it's like when you, I'm sure we've all done this, you work 100 hours to get finished so you can have a break at Christmas, right? And then as soon as you get close to stopping, you fall apart or you get sick. And that's getting sick is often the body's way of saying you need to stop. So, when you're sick, you feel tired, and you feel tired, so you sleep. And your sleep really helps your recovery. So I think this idea of you can push through sleep, and we can, you hear people saying they're just, oh, I've been a short sleeper my whole life, and maybe they are, and maybe they're okay with that, but then maybe there'll be a point where things fall apart. And if you're an athlete, it might be an injury, it might be long-term illness, who knows what it is.
And for people who are struggling then, because I imagine a lot of, the people I know who do struggle with sleep, it almost, the struggle with sleep becomes the stress in itself, and the fear of not being able to sleep then stops you. It becomes a vicious circle. But how would you, what would you say for people who are struggling with sleep? Like, what are we know the things like phones away, after 10, but what would you say that are other things that people can put, what structures to help them actually break that cycle?
Yeah, I would say there's usually sort of two discrete, or sometimes they happen together, but usually it's one of two things. It's either behaviours are bad, and it's caffeine, and it's phones in bed, or it's, people have kids and they're just distracted, they're up all night, or their routine's really bad. And so it's surprising when people just lock in to bed and wake times consistently, how much that can help. So I think there's things about looking at what behaviours people are doing. And phones are going to be one of them. But ultimately what phones do is they just shorten your sleep. You just get less an actual amount of sleep. So whenever I look at athlete sleep reports, there's usually the most common thing is you need to go to bed earlier and you need to be asleep and awake at more consistent times. It's incredibly common. And it's incredible how easily those fixes tend to work. Go to bed a little bit earlier and a little bit more consistently, and it's usually enough. Because the thing that we usually have control over is our bedtime. The things that we usually have less control over our wake time, because usually we have to be to work, or we have to be at training, or we've got things we need to do. So the things that we can control is usually going to bed. But that's often when we go, I'll just stay up and watch something else on Netflix or whatever it is. So that's one camp. The other is the stress. The people that are genuinely stressed and anxious, we know that that combination, stress and anxiety, sleep, don't go well together. And it can be just a matter of, very acute. I remember once working with an athlete who was getting such bad sleep, and talking to him, it was because he was actually getting married soon, right? And it wasn't that he didn't want to get married. He just had a lot on. He was just really busy, and I was like, do you not want to marry your wife? Like, what's going on? He's like, no, I'm all for it. It's just like, I was like, why are you so stressed about this wedding?
Last single days, I hear you. He was packing it in. He was living life.
Probably having cold feet. What he told me though was that he's just really busy, and it's in the season, and he was, elite footballer, but he was also, having all these other things on, and he probably wasn't the most organised person. So he'd go to bed, and that's your opportunity to think. And you go, oh, okay, I've got to do this tomorrow. There's this, there's that. And he just started keeping a really organised diary, and it fixed him. Totally fine. Because he went to bed knowing that he's got a plan. This is all going to work. I don't have to keep thinking about things that I'm worried about I'm going to forget. So there can be little acute things like that. it might be, a couple of nights a week, or, for some athletes who are waiting for selection, there can be certain nights where they don't sleep prior to finding out if they get picked for a team, or the night before a race, or whatever it is. So there can be acute things like that where people are a little bit stressed and a little bit anxious. But then there's also in that same camp people that have really serious stress and anxiety issues that probably need to get some help. It was interesting when we did our very first lot of sleep monitoring. So the very first paper we did was on our athletes preparing for Beijing. They were swimmers. And we looked, and I was like, oh, there's 2 out of this team that are really bad sleepers. And the psychologist, she said to me, don't tell me, I'll be able to tell you exactly who those 2 are. And she named the 2, and she got them exactly right. She said, oh, they're just highly, highly anxious. And so it was a bit of an insight then into, okay, yeah, this is really real. And so getting some help and it might just be finding meditation, relaxation, breathing, whatever it is that works for you. That can be one step. The next step out to that might be you need to get some help from a professional to manage, your levels of stress and anxiety.
And how does... Okay, Jody.
I was going to say one thing. I don't know whether this is a myth or not, but are like patterns of sleep, are they affected from sort of childhood? Like if you didn't sleep a lot in childhood, or you were up late and things like that, can that have an impact in terms of obviously has it in terms of habits, but does that have an impact in terms of getting your body used to going to bed at certain times? I'm completely thinking about my own personal experience as a child and a teenager, and being a total insomniac, watching stuff all the way through till 4 a.m. And I'm terrible at sleeping now, and I just wonder, is there a link?
Yeah, I haven't seen any signs, not to say that it's not out there, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think a couple of things probably happen, that you do set up patterns that become normal. So, some people, I look at their sleep and they think they're fine. And I'm like, well, that's just become normal. Your abnormality has just become normal for you, and you don't know what it feels like to sleep normally. I think setting up good patterns early is really important. And that's why they talk about, people with kids to have, bed and wake times consistent for the kids, move through to adulthood. It's exactly the same thing. But there is some really... this is taking it a whole other level, but there's a lot of really good research around childhood trauma and how that affects sleep in the long term. So can definitely be some connections there between poor sleep that continue through. But I think some of the habits and patterns that we have, and what your parents tell you, like I still remember being told you're in bed by 8:30, and sometimes I look at my phone and I'm like, oh, it's 8:30. Like I still remember that from 30 years ago, which is mad. But I do think that sometimes there's patterns and things that you set up that become your normal.
It's really funny because my parents didn't have any limits, in terms of I've never and I had and from a very young age I had a TV in my room as well, a really young age, sort of 7 or 8. And so I watched TV really, really late. And so, but the thing I wanted to ask about related to that was the fact that it doesn't matter then in terms of how bad your sleep may have been in the past, that actually it's entirely possible to train yourself into good sleep regardless of what happened. Those patterns aren't set on any kind of long-term basis. You're not locked into bad sleep, at any point in your life.
No, the only 2 caveats to that are if you actually have an underlying medical sleep disorder, which is rare. Not rare, but it's not the most common thing that you find. And then the second thing is your chronotype. So if you're a night owl or a lark, if you're someone who is a bit, you're biologically more like someone who likes to go to bed late and wake late.
So that does exist.
That is a thing.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's questionnaires that you can do to determine your chronotype. And if you're a night owl, you're usually someone who works more efficiently in the afternoon. I'm definitely more of a morning person. I work way better in the morning. People's desire, whether they're a night person or a morning person, is very real. Probably genetic as well. And therefore probably harder to change, which makes it hard when we're in certain societies where, if you're a runner and you want to run with a group, but we found though we've looked at the chronotype of elite athletes and we see very few night owls. They're mostly early morning or neutral people. We don't see many people that, have this desire to go to bed at midnight and wake up at 10 in the morning. So you can imagine, if you're a swimmer, you couldn't live like that. You'd get selected out because you couldn't live like that.
Do you think because of the way that swimming, like things like that happen, that actually we could be missing out on a whole swathe of athletes who are night owls, but they just don't fit into the norms of kind of training schedules?
Yeah, it's very possible. So if you think what happens in adolescence is your body clock shifts back, so you become more like a night owl. And so we all think they're just super lazy and they won't wake up in the morning, but no, their body clock is wired to be like that. And so you wonder why we lose, high school athletes, because we train them so early. They don't get any better. They don't adapt because they're not sleeping. They're not getting the recovery they need. They don't feel like they're getting anywhere, and they're hating life because they've got to go to school and they're sleeping through school and they're so sleep deprived. It's no wonder we lose them at that kind of high school age because they're superstars, and then they get to high school and they're duds because maybe they're more like a night owl, or maybe they're more their adolescence and their body clock shifted. So if we could be, as a society, a little more flexible with our start training times, like when we actually expect athletes to turn up to training in the morning, we may, find a whole other group of people that were previously untapped. But the challenge is when people have to go to school and when you've got limited access to facilities as athletes, that can be a challenge.
And do we need more sleep?
About chronotypes to, say, coaches, and you're saying this kind of stuff about that actually a 5 a.m. start may not be right for everyone. What's their kind of like response to that? What is there?
It depends. It depends. I've worked with teams of, elite teams where it's not a problem to push training back later. And they see the benefits and they're like, right, we're not going to turn up at the club till 11. And that's no problem and everything works fine. Now, that can work particularly well. Like, it doesn't work that well in Australia, especially when it's hot in summer. You can't start training that late. Like, you're going to cook people. So that's not a great idea. But in some countries, later starts, the sun's not up early. It just works brilliantly. Then we have sort of this other, and it's happened to me working with swim coaches, where if they've got to coach elite athletes, but also in that same squad are athletes that go to school, you've got to start them early. And they start everyone at the same time. Instead of doing 2 sessions and saying, school kids, we need to do you here, elite athletes, you can sleep in a bit later, we're going to train you here, they just want to do the 1 session. And that's sometimes part of the problem. Having elite athletes and non-elite athletes train together has some benefits, but often it's just this cultural thing, and they believe that the biggest distance between training session, like the longer you have between a training session during the day, the better, so you can recover. So 6 a.m. in the pool and then 4 p.m. in the pool for the next session, you've got all day to recover, but they forget that the best recovery that you have is at night. And they're shortening that to prioritise the length of time during the day, which to me just doesn't make sense. But you have to also educate the athletes, because if they don't have to get up as early, you can guarantee they're going to stay up late and not use it as an opportunity to get more sleep. They'll use it as a time to watch some more Netflix.
And do we need more sleep the more we exercise? Because there's so many listeners who will do back-to-back long runs over weekends to train for ultras. And do you need to increase the amount of sleep you have to match that? And also, should it widen on the days that you exercise more?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And to be honest, we don't 100% know the answer. We believe that, yes, athletes probably need more sleep than the general population because of the requirement for recovery. So if you think about the idea of sleep is to recover from the day that you've had, if the day that you've had includes, a lot of running as well as, plus your work day for a lot of people, then they'll actually, I believe, need more sleep, and they'll probably need more of the deep sleep to help them physically recover. So yes, I think that's the case. But in terms of, I think what you might be getting at, do we periodize sleep. Like, we periodise recovery, we periodise nutrition. I don't think that's something that I would entertain, and part of the reason for that is this idea about being consistent and mixing up, one night having a lot longer sleep than another is probably not a great idea, when really most people are sleep deprived anyway. So we should just be trying to get more rather than having some days where you get more and some days that you get less. Ideally, we're all getting most people could probably get an extra half an hour to an hour a night at least.
And something that we were talking with Robbie about in particular is now, particularly in running, we're moving towards sports, races where you're against the clock for day after day, or you're doing something like a backyard challenge where you will not be able to get more than 5 minutes sleep at any particular period, or adventure racing, which is 5 to 10 days non-stop. What do we know about the best approaches for sleep during periods like that, and things like 1 minute micro sleeps, 20-minute sleeps, hour sleeps?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And there's been different studies that have looked, the race across America, I know that's a cycling race, but, when to sleep and how long to ride for and all these kinds of things. And there seems to be no hard and fast rule. The only thing that seems to be very clear from the literature is don't start sleep deprived. Bank your sleep as much as you can, so that you're going into these races with, 5 or 6 or 7 nights beforehand with as much sleep as you can possibly get, because it seems like if you've got a really good solid base, and then you go in and your sleep drops off a little bit, it's probably not the end of the world. But if you're coming in with this low base already and then your sleep gets messed up over 4 or 5 days or however long it is, then you can be in real trouble. And it does completely depend on, the tactics of the race as to when you might sleep during longer sleeps, shorter sleeps. Each race is so different that it's hard to give guidelines. The only thing we can really say, one is probably to test it out a little bit and to know what works for you, but also to just don't go in sleep deprived if you possibly can. And that's where travel becomes a real thing. So if people are flying in, like to especially long haul in their traveling, then all of a sudden you can start quite sleep deprived. And so not flying in, if you don't have to, too close to the event, if you are flying, is good. Like get into the new time zone or recover from your flight adequately, so you're not starting in a bad place.
And is it worth, say you are going somewhere that is, say we were racing in the Middle East, which is 3 hours ahead, is it worth adjusting your sleep ahead of time so that you're waking up at a similar time to what you'd wake up there? You start waking up at 4:30 in the morning rather than 7:30, or?
Yeah. In theory, that is the best way. That's kind of the only way that's ever described to not have jet lag, is to fix yourself before you go, because there's really no other way. However, in reality, it's just really hard to do. So it depends on which direction you're traveling, how many time zones you're shifting. There's sometimes where you might want to, you might have to do 3 or 4 hour shifts, but that doesn't work for your actual life or your training, or when you want to your access to facilities or the daylight hours. And usually what we see with people who have tried that is they just get on the plane knackered. They're just tired before they even leave, because their sleep schedule's been messed up so much that they hop on the plane and they're a bit stuffed before they even depart. So my advice would be to get there a little bit earlier, get into the new time zone as quickly as possible, use light at the right times, and there's ways to calculate that to do it properly, but just get in sync into the new place as quickly as you can, rather than potentially starting and messing it up before you even leave.
And I've heard with jet lag, food potentially is something else that the body has a rhythm for. So knowing it's breakfast, lunch, whatever your rhythm is that something can we use that to slightly hack a quicker jet lag, and a shorter jet lag?
Yes, 100%. Eat, sleep and exercise and get light in the new time zone, which can be a bit of a challenge. I know, like, you fly to somewhere new and it's you just don't feel like eating breakfast. Like, you're in dinner time, and, especially in Australia, like usually when we fly somewhere, the whole world's spun around completely. So it's like 12 hours difference or something hideous. And so you just don't feel like, because we know your gastrointestinal system, everything is still on the old time zone. But yes, eating, and we always recommend that for when our teams are traveling, is to obviously be prepared in advance with the right food, because sometimes you go places and you don't like anything that they eat because the typical foods are different. So maybe bringing your own food if you may need, but eating on those times, and exercising at fairly normal times is really important.
And is it important to replicate the size of the meal as well, or is just having a light dinner sufficient, or do you need to go all out for your pasta bake or whatever you're typically used to?
Yeah, I probably would just eat what you think you can tolerate. Try to eat it at the right times, but we do know that going to bed too full or too hungry is not great. So eat what you typically eat at that time for dinner, but maybe, if you're not that hungry, I wouldn't be, forcing yourself to eat. But sometimes, I know this happens to me, sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night hungry. So you're sleeping lighter anyway, because it's actually, for you, it's the middle of the day. So you shouldn't be sleeping. So you're having light sleep. We still have, most people know a lot of people, I do it too, wake up a lot at night to go to the bathroom, because you have a diurnal, rhythm to when you go to the bathroom. So, it's like, oh God, I've woken up like 4 times to pee. It's like, oh God. And so it gets really, you get really frustrated, and then you wake up and you're hungry because you didn't have a big dinner. And then you think, oh God, I've got to eat now, so I'm starving. So trying to just keep it as normal as you can. I always now just go, look, I know the first couple of days I'm going to feel ordinary. Things aren't going to be normal. I'll drink coffee during the morning. I'll get through the best I can. And at some point I'm going to feel good. I don't get as not obsessed with it, but I don't get as try to do every tiny little thing, because I know I'm just going to feel bad and I'm just going to deal with it for a little while. I'm not going to do things that are going to make it worse. And I'll do little habits that I think have worked for me over the years that you will work out. But overall, I try to be a little bit more flexible with my approach to it and just go, yeah, I'm not going to feel perfect. No one's going to feel perfect after long haul travel.
I've always just been told if you keep on nodding off, just hold your breath for as long as you can, and eventually you're going to wake up quite quickly, because it's quite nice actually if you're driving, or because it's quite fun to do as well. As long as maybe not on the bus, but
I have not tried that.
And because the most likely race scenarios that our listeners will be in will probably be a 24-hour race or a 100-miler, maybe something a bit longer, or a backyard scenario where they're getting 10 minutes rest every hour for as many days. I mean, Harvey, who was just interviewed, did 3 days straight, I think. When Camille set the 24-hour record, she actually slept twice, I think, that one of the times, for like a minute or two. Like, are they? Is there a substantial difference in the sleep of a minute or two and the sleep of 20 minutes in terms of the effect of it, but also the nature of that sleep?
That's another good question. And an example of this is we did a study when I was at the Institute of Sport, and we had our best cyclists that we could get hold of come in. We simulated a Tour de France. We measured their sleep every night. We had polysomnography. We had every gadget known to them. We wanted to track their sleep over the time. We did this horrible test. It's called a multiple sleep latency test, where you put them in bed during the day, and as soon as they get into deep sleep, you wake them up. It's shocking, feels hideous, and you repeat that. Now, the sleep lab people who got the data, who'd never monitored elite athletes before, thought something had gone wrong, because these guys were getting into deep sleep during the day in minutes. And they're like, that's not what we learn in textbooks. That can't be real. But it was very real. So what had happened was these guys were so tired that they almost skipped the lighter stages of sleep and went straight into deep sleep. So I imagine, having never done a 24-hour race, I never will, that the desire the ability for the body to go, I need to recover, I'm going to drop you straight into deep sleep quickly, and being that fatigued and having that much requirement for sleep, that it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of minutes, athletes are getting into pretty deep sleep. It's always stating the very obvious here. It's a trade-off between, the more you sleep, the less you're running, right? So you're going to lose time by sleeping, but for everyone, it's going to be different as to, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time going, right, I'm going to sleep for 20 minutes and you're lying there for 10. Then you've just completely wasted half of your time there. So you want to probably sleep when you know you're going to sleep, like when you're really sleepy, when you go, I know that if I stop now, I'm going to nap. And probably shorter naps in that instance are probably going to be best because they will probably get into a pretty deep sleep pretty easy. And then you're maximising your time to actually be running.
And is there any way to have measured what the quality of sleep is for periods? Like if, say, you had a 1 to 20 minute or 1 to 5 minute bell curve of how much of the I can't remember the blockers that make you feel tired and in your head and various things. Is it the case that if you're really deprived, 2 minutes is better than 1 minute, double, or that you get to, like, the first minute's the best, the second minute's not quite as good, the third minute's not quite as good? Like what does that graph look like for people who are trying to figure out what might fit in best for their strategy?
Yeah. So usually the way that sleep would work is you'd start out awake, then you go into stage 1 sleep, which is light sleep. You go into stage 2 sleep, which is a little bit deeper, but then the good stuff is you really get that stage 3 sleep. That's where we think you get the most physical recovery. And a lot of athletes get really caught up on, I didn't get any slow wave sleep, or I need more slow wave sleep. But the next stage is REM sleep. And we know that REM is particularly important for the brain. And also potentially now, we always thought a lot of hormones were released in slow wave sleep. And now it's like, maybe they might actually be released just as much in REM sleep or more in REM sleep. So we want to get as much sort of stage 2, 3 and REM sleep as possible. Now, the more sleep deprived you are, the quicker you're going to miss those lighter stages of sleep and go into the deep ones. And so, but the challenge is that everyone is really different, and most of the wearables really struggle to pick up naps, really struggle. So they struggle to get staging of sleep. Most of them don't. If they do, they don't really get it very accurate. And then add on top of that it's almost impossible to pick up naps really accurately. So I would say in that instance, you just have to go by feel, whether the athlete feels like they got into some decent sleep, probably practicing things as often as possible, trying different strategies in different events and coming up with what actually sort of works for them.
And are there any other things that aren't intuitive, or any studies you've done or results or outliers that have been would be surprising for people?
Yeah, I mean, that one that I just talked about, the one of getting how much deep sleep they get and how quickly, I think that was something that we didn't really expect. I think there are just some athletes, and I certainly can't name names, but have recently done some sleep monitoring with a team, one of the athletes you would know, but my general rule is that the best athletes that I've ever worked with tend to be the best sleepers. You don't tend to see really bad sleepers as really good athletes. But this particular athlete was pretty shocking. And probably not shocking so much in duration, a few bad nights here and there, but just patterns were all over the place. But this athlete's probably had the best season of their life. And so then it's really hard because, the coaches and all the staff have got the reports and go, you need to sort this player out. Look at their sleep. And I'm like, do you want to change this? Like, maybe we could, and maybe they could be better, but they're doing pretty damn good. And do we want to mess with that? And I think that's where the challenges come, as you go, well, I think we should just let this person be this person because they're nearly the best in the world, and let's just let them do it. And maybe they are an anomaly, and, just maybe if things start to fall apart or things aren't going as well, we can look to correct it. But right now, if it's all about performance and whether you're playing well and whether you're winning, wouldn't be changing it. So sometimes like that, things become a little bit tricky.
And if people do have a problem with their sleep all of a sudden, and because to speak about our circumstances, like Briggsy, my wife, she when we first met, she used to do this thing called Project Autumn, where she'd wake up to start exercise at 6 or 6:30, where you'd be at the place for the exercise. And unfortunately, my influence has probably, well, definitely reduced her attendance of that. But then after about a year or two, she's from then until now, she's just exhausted every morning and like really struggles to wake up. So going from someone who would be bouncing out of bed, ready to, excited to run to exercise, to suddenly we'll get to weekends and she'll be there until 10 every night, in the morning, just absolutely knocked out, and really take a long time to get going any day that she does wake up. And if people are in circumstances like that, is there a checklist of things they can go through? We've talked about regular sleep patterns, making sure you're getting enough, no screens. Are there any other things that people can go through to try and figure out what could be triggering or causing these problems?
Yeah, as you say, looking at habits and patterns, and whether all of a sudden you're going to bed much later, then therefore you want to wake up much later. Lack of morning sunlight is generally, like, morning sunlight is a thing that triggers our body clock. And I know a lot of people who are who sleep in really late, just getting them to wake up a little bit earlier to get some sunlight. Now, that's obviously easier where I live, a little bit harder in some other parts of the world where the sun doesn't come up super early.
Do artificial lamps and things, are they that have the right light setting? Do they work in that respect?
They do. Nothing is quite like the sun. When you look at the lux, how we measure light, there's nothing that's like sunlight. Nothing comes close to it. But these light boxes and light devices that I know is used a lot in the Northern Hemisphere and in winter can be really, they're better than nothing, absolutely. So they can be something. So trying to get some sunlight earlier in the morning can be good. The other thing that it's always worth talking to a professional and a medical person. I know, like with women, as females age, hormones can go all over the place. We know hormones are really associated with sleep, and progesterone in particular, female hormone, is related to sleep. And sometimes it's a matter of getting the hormones balanced. Now, menopause, obviously, way down the track, but lots of, that's when the hormones are almost, start to become non-existent. A lot of women have a lot of problems with sleep, and the symptoms that are around that, like hot flushes and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it can be hormonal imbalances in women. It can be almost like what we're talking about, is you've pushed and pushed and pushed and your whole life, and being someone who's super active and tried to jam everything in, and then all of a sudden your body's like, had enough of that. You've sleep deprived me for 10 years. Now it's my time, and I'm going to get some sleep. So I think it's always nice to explore with a good doctor around hormone levels in women particularly. But if you've looked at all the behaviours are all good. You're doing all the right things. You're not having caffeine late. Your room's a good environment. All that kind of stuff. You're not super stressed. You're actually getting a lot of sleep. And you're still feeling bad, it's probably worth chatting a little bit further, especially for women where hormones can be fun.
And in terms of food that affects sleep, we know that certain drugs, caffeine, are the big players. But are there any other things that we might not be aware of that could actually be beneficial? Or, other than chamomile tea, that is a dreadful thing that's always shoved upon you. Are there any other things that do have an impact in a positive or negative way?
Yeah, the nutrition, and we've actually done a big nutrition and sleep study. We've got another one coming up, and they're tricky to do, and it's tricky because a lot of the work is to come up with something succinct is difficult, because everyone uses different ways of measuring sleep, different doses of things, different timing. It's a combination of timing and dose before sleep. But one of the things that I think is important to consider is that sleep is like a real classical conditioning thing. It's like Pavlov's dog, right? So if you keep doing the same thing before sleep, and so whether that's a glass of warm milk, that old mum, what your mum told you when you were a kid, right? If you do that regularly, the body's like, oh, I know what's about to happen. When I have milk 2 hours before bed or 1 hour before bed, I know that sleep's about to happen. And your physiology changes in response to this conditioning, right? So we can use foods to create a habit. If they're something like milk, which actually when you look at it has pretty much the right amount of carbohydrate, the right amount and type of protein, and some electrolytes in it. So it's probably a really good sleep drink. And if you take it regularly, like so here, kind of weather I'm in now, you might have a cold glass of milk. In winter, other places you might have a warm glass of milk. So milk is actually, proteins are particularly good. The thing to avoid, apart from caffeine, is high glycemic index foods right before bed. You tend to get that insulin spike. Yeah. Don't have any lollies before bed. So you tend to get an insulin spike, and then people get a bit buzzed, and then so anything high GI too close to bed. High GI foods, 2 to 4 hours before bed might work, because you might get that insulin spike and then the come down, and then you might actually sleep. But things like certain herbs, milk, certain proteins, low GI carbohydrate before bed, it's probably all very reasonable things. But again, it sort of comes down to, don't eat too much. So you don't want to go to bed full and trying to digest your food while you're lying down. That's not great. And also, not going to bed too hungry, so that when you wake up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, you're absolutely ravenous.
And things like hot baths, hot showers, are they effective?
Yes, yeah. So our ability to sleep is really closely linked to our body temperature. Our core body temperature and the difference between our core temperature and our skin temperature. So again, here where I live, it would be cold showers and cold baths. But in other places, it would be warm baths and warm showers. So generally just getting your body to a place where it's comfortable and where you can eventually lose heat. Because cooling is really important for sleep.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And what do you think will be changing in what you're researching in the future? What elements do we still not fully understand?
Yeah, we really don't understand, and this is more from a science perspective rather than a practical perspective. We really don't understand the stages of sleep and how they relate to athletes and performance. So we've got some studies starting with that. We've got a study planned for next year. These studies would have been done except for COVID, so unfortunately we'll wait for these. We don't know the effect of sleep medication on sleep architecture.
That was going to be my question, actually. Sleeping pills, yes. I just remembered it was. Yeah.
Well, the problem with sleeping pills, like any drug, is there's usually a side effect. But what we know about sleeping tablets is that they probably result in about a 20-minute to 30-minute, at most, increase in sleep duration. And they can fragment sleep. So you tend to not get the deeper sleep. You tend to get more of a lighter sleep. But we don't know, for the amount of sleep drugs that are prescribed to athletes, we don't have a clue as to what it does to sleep architecture in athletes. But most importantly, we don't know what it does to morning waking. So we know in elderly people, they're more likely to have falls and to be groggy and to have headaches in the morning, slower reaction times. We don't know what effect it has on athletes. So that's actually our study for next year. But we really actively try to get people to identify the source of the problem and why they're not sleeping, rather than taking a sleeping pill. That sleeping pills aren't designed for long-term use. They've never been approved for long-term use. They're for the sort of thing where you go, I'm super stressed, something really bad's happened, I've got zero sleep, I'll take something for a few nights that's probably a suitable, or you're jet lagged, it's probably a suitable way of using them. But if you've just got sleep problems, identify what's wrong rather than putting a Band-Aid on it, because as soon as you stop the sleeping pills, you'll go back to where you were, if not worse.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom.
Pleasure. No problem. It was great.
Yeah, when you do publish that, when you do publish that report, let us know, because we'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah,
And
that's going to be a fun one.
yeah, absolutely. And do you now have the ability where, because of your job, if you're ever tired in the office, you just have a little nap and you're like, research. I'm just researching. Fine.
Exactly. Like, we know the science behind this nap, and it's very important.
I'm doing this for you, not for me.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's
Well,
right.
and if people want to kind of reach out to you to follow your research, to ask any questions, anything like that, what's the best way for them to do that?
Twitter's probably the only social media that I really use. So yeah, I'm just Shona Halson on Twitter. And so yeah, always happy to chat.
Amazing. Well, thanks for your time,
Cool. Thank
and
you, David.
have a good evening.
Yes, have a good day.
Thanks, Shona.
Thanks. See ya.
That was
I had to sleep. I went to sleep. I was that. What I like about that whole interview is the fact that we had to get up early than we normally would in order to talk about sleep, and we were both incredibly tired and visibly tired as well while doing it.
Yeah, it's that Christmas period. This one actually, this conversation reminded me a lot about fitness addiction. In that,
Really?
yeah, just almost a lot of it, like a lot of the problems are actually we overthink, we overdo,
Too much stimuli.
and
It's too much stimuli. It's
yeah, and both with fitness addiction and with this was just look around, look at what you're doing, be sensible. Like, is it becoming too much, or so that was a sleep addiction thing. You know, is it becoming more of a need than a? Whereas in this one was just that. Really, I think I was expecting more of a magic wand, and it seems that actually the magic wand is just sleep at the same time and try not to have loads of stuff going on just before, and just before you go to bed, and get get enough hours in. And do you do that? And the fact that it seems so many people don't, and I think that's probably true of most of us, right? Because even if Briggsy and I are pretty good at going to bed an approximate hour,
yeah.
But then the weekend comes and hell no, or hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that's not like it with us. But my sleep is all over the place. But the thing is, I've told myself this story for so long by going, and she totally like disregarded it. I was like, my sleep was messed up when I was a kid, when I was and becoming a teenager, and that's why. And I can't sleep now because I've just got into these, But really, it's just bad habits and bad patterns. Because I can go to sleep. I'll go to sleep and I'll have really good sleep. And I'll go to bed at, get in bed at 9:30, and then I'll be asleep by 10:30. And then I can get up at 5 or 6, and I'll be perfect. And that's perfect time for me. And I'll do that for 3 days. And then just one day, I'm staying up to 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, watching Marvel films. And it'll just fuck up everything. It just completely fucks up everything. And I don't know why I do it. It's just, I've always gone, there's too much consistency in my sleep. And I've decided I don't want that. I just want to. I don't know. It's the consistency element that I find
The Hulk irresistible, don't you?
Pardon?
Just find the Hulk irresistible.
I do. It's difficult when you have so much. But because we've just moved. Where we were before, we were on a road that was quite a busy road. And had lights. Because it was kind of in the centre of Hayward Heath, and there were lights on and things like that. And actually, it wasn't that dark at night. Now we've moved further out. There was no lights on it. We're right next to a golf course. There are no lights anywhere, and the quality of the sleep, just not even taking into account that when we're staying up late, but the quality of sleep has dramatically improved from having just being pitch black all around us. It makes a massive difference. I
wish I'd have asked it. That makes me. I hate it when we do an interview and you then think of the question afterwards. You're like, God damn it, that was my chance. Because actually, that's a really good question. Is how we've been looking at houses, and when we've been in a house where the bedroom's on the front of the house and the road may be fairly busy, there's this whole, or there's a train track, or there's this whole, people say that you just get used to the noise eventually, and whether you do, that would be a great question. Maybe I'll email her, because do you get used to the noise, or do you just get so frigging tired from it that you then sleep through the agony, or do you just have bad sleep the whole time?
Because that's the thing, it's the difficulty, isn't it? Because you don't know, it might not wake you up, but it might knock you from a deep sleep into a light sleep, and you just you kind of don't know. I'm really interested in because I'm really skeptical at how accurate some of the sleep measuring things are, and I'm quite interested in that ring, but I hate wearing a ring. The idea of wearing that, I've seen it before in loads of places. But
you can't be stopped with the ladies, can you? But it's just anything to hold you back. Can't keep a good man down with that talent.
I'm married to my metrics. But I always wonder, because I don't know how accurate the some of the stuff, like, what's it called, the things that you have on your phone when you use the sleep apps on your phone. There was one app that I had, I think it's Pillow, and for some reason, I don't know why it did this. It recorded you every time you snored. And so you'd wake up the next day and you'd have 150 recordings of each individual snore, which would take up all the space. Make the power run, take up all the space on your phone. You're like, what is the value in that feature?
I think Libby probably put that feature in just to remind you of just how dreadful a husband you are. I think that was her intentional way of just that constant.
Imagine if the analysis of your sleep went down to think about the individual snore. My fourth or fifth snore of the night, I think, was a perfect snore. But as you got to, between 10 and 25, you can see it's tailing off slightly. I was less committed to the snoring at that point.
But Briggsy used to, because I remember we were at a wedding and I'd checked, because I typically would check my phone before I get bad boy, take the phone to bed with me, and I'd read an email or I'd read a message, because I'd look at something for Caffeine Bullet and suddenly I'd just be wide awake.
Yeah.
And I'd be wide awake for hours, and then she's like, well, don't look at your bloody phone then. And actually I'm like, yeah, she's right. I need to remove the things that could potentially keep me awake. But do better. Who sleeps well, who sleeps badly? And email us if you sleep badly, and think about it. Do you genuinely get regular sleep that's long enough and still have a problem? And if you don't, are you doing all the basics that she talked about? I'll put a poll in the Facebook group while we remember of who actually does what, because I think that'd be insightful to find out whether people are actually not sleeping enough but bad behaviours, or not sleeping enough with good behaviours. What percentage of people are just not doing it right?
I honestly think that when I've been for runs, I've been for a run or something, I think that poor sleep has a bigger effect on that than nutrition. If I'm going for a training run, I think it is that big.
Okay, yeah.
I wonder if other people have the same.
And even if it's not for running, it will be for motivation. Massively.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice depressing message to end on. So, which is why you need Caffeine Bullet for a little.
Make sure. I hope you're listening to this at 11 in the evening.
Just have a lie down on trial, my friend.
What we should do. You know, they have those apps, and you can get Sean Bean telling a story gently type thing. What we should do.
Sean Bean? Really?
Like Sean Bean or Tom Hardy I don't know why they would have Sean Bean, but they would have someone telling a story with some raindrops in the background and gently willing you to sleep. Maybe we should do something similar in order to help the sleep of the do-badders.
Some of the episodes have definitely been like that. We won't mention which guests because it's too rude. But well, do-badders, thanks for listening. And if you've got any suggestions of guests or topics, let us know, because we go out and get them. You can either message me, Instagram, david@badboyrunning.com, and please, a new feature we've just discovered, you can now review on Spotify. You can't leave comments, so if you want to be funny or a bit of a dick, then get onto iTunes or what the equivalent. But please go onto Spotify on your mobile phone and just leave a 5-star review. It really, really, actually, I don't know if it'll help. It'll probably help. I was going to say it really helps. We've no idea. It's new, but I'd imagine it will help for the algorithm.
It's going to help. One of us will die if you don't do it.
Yes, but it'll be the one that you do like, not the other one.
To live, yeah.
Whoever that may be.
Your least favourite one will live.
Yeah. And they'll have to speak twice as much because of the lack of the other. But please do review. Anything to throw into the mix, Jody?
Sorry?
Anything to throw into the mix?
Oh yeah, come and join the Facebook group. If you head over to Facebook, type in Bad Boy Running Podcast, answer 3 questions and join. If you want to buy merch, head to store.badboyrunning.com. We've got plenty of merch in there for you. And make sure that you place an order for your mugs for the running show.
Yeah, we'll see you at the running show. I've just confirmed the Ultra lineup, and assuming that they all can come, it's really good. Like, the worst person on there is really good. I'm not going to say who that is.
Who is that?
Do you have 2 people in mind? No, I don't actually. I don't. It's all personal. All personal. Should we give them special awards? Like as a, or maybe at the end of the session, be like, guys, if you enjoyed this session, genuinely, this is the worst person we've got. So you've got to come back for the others because they're going to be brilliant.
The thing is, once they see the lineup, you'll know who you're talking about.
I don't know if they will, because actually we've got some pretty epic and varied, and I'm not sure if we need some more people or not. I haven't quite done the calculations, but we'll see you at the run show, and have a happy Christmas. And if this is way too late, have a happy Christmas next year, because
we want to have happy Christmas every year. What time of year it is, have a happy Christmas.
Have a happy Christmas. Oh, Merry Christmas. Someone asked me, do we say Merry Happy? We do say happy.
It's Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good point. So have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.